Your friends from college are asking you how to buy Bitcoin. Your mom is emailing you articles about the benefits of decentralized peer-to-peer networks. Your shoe shiner is telling you to buy XRP and Neo and Tron. It's 2018 and cryptocurrencies have become a daily part of news headlines. The general public may not understand how this technology works, but everyone knows that changes are on the horizon. At some point in the future, our financial and computing systems will be deeply integrated with the crypto economy. We all remember the dot-com boom. We know that some people got fantastically rich during that period through speculation, and we think maybe this is our chance to make a bunch of money. If you read Reddit or almost any news site, you will see stories of obscene wealth intertwined with pseudoscientific discussions of how a new cryptocurrency is going to change the world. What is fact and what is fiction? How far are we from a beautiful future with frictionless micropayments and self-driving cars that are paying for themselves? Matt Leising is a journalist at Bloomberg who has covered financial markets for 15 years. Today, his reporting has been completely engulfed by cryptocurrencies. There are so many dramatic stories, it's hard to pick what to focus on. Today, we discuss two topics that he has covered recently, Ripple and Tether. Ripple is a company that makes enterprise blockchain solutions for global payments. That sounds like the future, and it's no surprise that people would want to buy into Ripple if possible. Ripple has been around for 7 years, and they have a strong team and relationships with major financial institutions. One of Ripple's early projects was a currency called XRP. The goal of XRP was to make a fast, scalable digital asset that would be facilitation for currency exchange among banks. We covered Ripple and XRP in previous episodes with David Schwartz and Greg Kidd, who have both been involved with Ripple, the company. XRP remains in circulation, but Ripple, the company, has shifted development resources away from XRP and towards RippleNet, which seeks to replace the aging Swift code system for banks. Today, XRP is being experimented with by several money transfer companies, but the digital currency itself is not widely used for anything. Well, other than speculation. In the tremendous crypto coin bull run of early 2018, XRP shot up as sharply as almost any other coin. In an article about Ripple, Matt Leising tried to get to the root of the explanation for why this occurred. Was it a sudden market recognition of some long-term value of XRP? Was it a stampeding herd of people who did not know the state of XRP, and then they were just having FOMO from the other people who were putting money into XRP, and you just have classic herd mentality? Was it a pump and dump that was orchestrated by people who recognized that people might be subject to buying into some story of XRP? A few days after publishing his article about Ripple, Matt wrote another story about Tether. Tether is totally unrelated to Ripple, except that it's another story of crypto insanity. Tether purports to be a stable coin, which is a digital currency that is pegged to the value of something less volatile, because cryptocurrencies have a lot of volatility, and typically in your currency, you don't want a lot of volatility because you want to know that if I'm going to have to go to the store to buy milk tomorrow, I don't want to have to plan my day around the times in the day when my dollar is worth more so that my milk is essentially cheaper. Stable coins are useful in that they can reduce friction of exchange between tokens. So without a stable coin, you might have to transfer from one cryptocurrency to USD, which probably involves the US banking system. There's a good discussion of stablecoins in our previous episode with Vlad Zamfir and Hasib Qureshi on cryptoeconomics. You can find the links to those in the show notes for this episode. And if you can use Tether instead of USD, if you're a trader, you have less transactional friction. You might be able to escape the onerous tax consequences of day trading cryptocurrencies also. Tether claims to have $1 USD in reserve for every one Tether in circulation. So if you wanted to cash out Tether for USD, you should theoretically be able to do that because Tether says, okay, we've got $1 USD for every Tether in circulation. You should be able to go to the Tether repository and take out USD. Except that Tether seems to have no connection to any US banks. And Tether has severed its ties with auditing agencies that it was working with. These auditing agencies that wanted to, well, Tether had initialized relationships with auditing agencies that were going to verify that Tether was legitimately doing business, and Tether severed the ties with those auditing agencies. So it's a little bit suspicious. There's $2.3 billion worth of Tether in circulation, and that's a small fraction of the overall trading volume of cryptocurrencies, but it's unknown how much the current crypto bubble is propped up by the functionality of Tether. The ability to seamlessly move between cryptocurrencies without going into USD. As long as the market believes in Tether, and today the market does indeed believe in Tether, it's valued at $0.999014 per Tether, so the market only disbelieves in Tether to the degree of a fraction of a cent. And this stablecoin mystique is going to persist as long as that valuation of $1 per Tether persists. And so the market frictions are going to continue to be smoothed out by that belief. So it's an open question as to what degree Tether really is propping up the market and reducing friction. This was Matt Leising's second appearance on the show, and it was a blast to have him back on. I love talking to him. In his last episode, he discussed the infamous DAO hack, which led to an Ethereum fork. And if you want to find that episode, as well as links to learn more about the topics described in the show, you can download the Software Engineering Daily app for iOS or Android. These apps have all 650 of our episodes in a searchable format. We have recommendations and categories and related links, discussions around the episodes. You can find all of our blockchain-related episodes. It's all free. It's also open source if you're interested in getting involved in our open source community. We have lots of people that are working on the project, and we do our best to be friendly and inviting to new people coming in, looking for their first open source project. And you can find that project at github.com/softwareengineeringdaily. We've got lots of stuff to work on, so if you're interested in getting involved, please check it out. And with that, let's get to this episode. DigitalOcean is a reliable, easy-to-use cloud provider. I've used DigitalOcean for years, whenever I want to get an application off the ground quickly. And I've always loved the focus on user experience, the great documentation, and the simple user interface. More and more people are finding out about DigitalOcean and realizing that DigitalOcean is perfect for their application workloads. This year, DigitalOcean is making that even easier with new node types. A $15 flexible droplet that can mix and match different configurations of CPU and RAM to get the perfect amount of resources for your application. There are also CPU-optimized droplets, perfect for highly active front-end servers or CI/CD workloads. And running on the cloud can get expensive, which is why DigitalOcean makes it easy to choose the right size instance. And the prices on standard instances have gone down too. You can check out all their new deals by going to do.co/sedaily. And as a bonus to our listeners, you will get $100 in credit to use over 60 days. That's a lot of money to experiment with. You can make $100 go pretty far on DigitalOcean. You can use the credit for hosting or infrastructure, and that includes load balancers, object storage. DigitalOcean Spaces is a great new product that provides object storage. And, of course, computation. Get your free $100 credit at do.co/sedaily. And thanks to DigitalOcean for being a sponsor. The co-founder of DigitalOcean, Moisey Uretsky, was one of the first people I interviewed, and his interview was really inspirational for me. So I've always thought of DigitalOcean as a pretty inspirational company. So thank you, DigitalOcean. Matt Leising, you are a reporter at Bloomberg. You were previously on the show to talk about the DAO hack. Thanks for coming back on Software Engineering Daily.
Oh, you're welcome. It's great to be here, Jeff. Thanks.
We're in the midst of some crazy, bubbly times, and you're one of the few people who's very capable of reporting on blockchain-related stories, cryptocurrency-related stories. How are you choosing what stories to write about today when there's so much that you can choose from?
Yeah, that's my dilemma. I liken it to drinking from a fire hose. There's different layers, I think, of the reporting and the stories and their seriousness. You know, there's always a Kodak coin story out there that sort of seems just, where does this come from? Or some of the stories about stocks that are changing their names to reflect some kind of blockchain play, and then they go up, 300%. Those are good stories, and we cover those stories, but I try to dig in a little bit deeper and use the sources I've built up over, 15 years of writing about the financial market to kind of get a little bit deeper, and maybe at this point in the cycle here in blockchain to kind of take the temperature and hold some of these companies accountable for the promises that they're making. That's sort of always been my preferred way of doing my job.
Well, the shoe is going to drop eventually on some of the companies that you're talking about. And once the public really starts to get hammered financially, like I went home to Austin. I'm from Austin originally for a wedding recently, and I was catching up with some friends. And we spent the whole time talking about cryptocurrency speculation, and my friends are computer science people, but we didn't talk about the engineering. We didn't talk about the technical internals. We just talked about speculation. And if I'm talking about speculation with my technical friends, the less technical people, the discussion of speculation is even more acute. And it's concerning. I mean, it's inspiring, but it's also concerning. Have you seen this obsession with speculation, the shoe shiners? Has it seized your friends and family as well?
Yeah, it has, absolutely. I can't go to a party or even to a bar where I'm just, not trying to bring it up, and it will come up. I'll overhear people talking, or somebody will ask me about it, and then they find out what I do, and then, the horse is out of the barn. And I try to explain to them how things work and the different aspects to it all. Like an ICO is risky. Bitcoin is, here to stay. And it's amazing to me how often the people who have money in this market just don't really understand any of the underlying technology. And I think they're just seeing these incredible gains. And yeah, it is scary. And part of what we try to do at Bloomberg is just put out balanced, good reporting on this so people can make their own decisions. I feel like there is going to be a reckoning when a lot of the ICO craze, starts to go down in flames, and that's troubling. The reaction I get on Twitter to my stories makes me feel like these people have a lot of money at stake, and they're taking it out on me when I report on things that they don't want to hear. So it seems like that's a concern.
It's like religious fervor.
Absolutely. Yes. It is very much a religious sort of tinged moment right now. I went to a meetup in Santa Monica a couple months ago where Roger Ver spoke about Bitcoin Cash. And that was immediately when I wrote it up, I compared it to a sort of like a tent revival. It was in a backyard, and people were just in awe of him and this new, thing that, was something that they could invest, and they could make, 10 times the amount of money that they've put in a matter of weeks. And it's kind of astounding.
I remember this documentary I saw about the 1920s stock market run up and crash. And there was, I think it's on Netflix. It was really good. I don't remember the title of it. Maybe The Great Crash or something. But there's like, this always happens in these kinds of run-ups. I remember there was like a fortune teller in the 1920s, and she was like writing a newsletter. She had like a fortune teller newsletter and was like, these are the stocks that my premonitions have informed me are going to rise. And of course, she had a following, and the following would bid those things up, and not much has changed in 100 years.
No, I agree. And even a casual observer of something like Twitter in the cryptocurrency space will see this every day, every minute of every day. People are pumping things, and it's just I don't know, it's hard to wrap your head around, but just the sheer sort of psychological delusions that are going on in a lot of these markets. And it's there for all of us to see. And just the fact that it seems to me a lot of these coins and Bitcoin and Ether and all the others seem to go up and down in tandem, which is kind of should be a warning sign that something, if this is a diverse area, you wouldn't expect to see that.
I find it hard. Like I really try to steel myself psychologically against these more basal human tendencies of falling victim to the greater fool theory. But when I was back in Austin, and I was just talking to my friends, and everybody's foaming at the mouth about what cryptocurrencies they should buy or what people are talking about on Reddit, my friend showed me his mobile wallet, and he showed me some 82x gains on something called Ryblocks. I had never heard of it. And, I've tried to follow this space pretty closely, and I saw those gains, and I was like, maybe I should be doing this. Maybe, as insane as it is, maybe I should be getting in on the pump and dump roller coaster. You could take $2,000, you treat it like you're throwing money into penny stocks, you get in on the pump and dump Telegram chat rooms, you see if you can get 100x. How do you avoid falling into that temptation? Is that tempting to you at all, or is it just not hard for you to steel yourself against it?
No, I have to steel myself against it. I'm not allowed to invest in any of this stuff. It's against the rules, the ethics rules we have at Bloomberg News. It's also just good reporting sense to not, if I covered Microsoft, I wouldn't be allowed to own Microsoft shares, because you would then have a good case to say that, I've got a bias to the upside, and I'm only going to try to report positive things about Microsoft. And as a reporter, you can't do that. You have to just go out and find the story, and no matter what it is, make sure it's accurate and get it out to your readers. And so I think that's what I get accused of that a lot on Twitter of, you must have a position in something, or you want XRP to fail because it's going to make you money in some other coin. And it's almost impossible to try to stem that tide of criticism, because it's just not true. So
you can't even own Bitcoin or Ethereum.
Correct. I have experimented with Ethereum because I cover it, and I've wanted, I've checked out MetaMask, and I've bought a record on the Ethereum blockchain, because that's the thing that people are talking about, these new digital apps. So just to know the beat, but I'm not allowed to invest or hold this stuff as some sort of portfolio.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to get into talking about XRP, and eventually we'll talk about Tether a little bit, but a little more on the State of the Union. These pump and dumps are kind of crazy, like the Telegram chat rooms where people are pumping and doing this orchestrated pumping and dumping. What have you heard about this stuff? Like, are the blockchain pump and dumps, is this stuff any different than what goes on with penny stocks or biotech? Is this unprecedented?
I don't think so. I would say that at this point, the SEC has started to dip its toe in, and they are getting more serious about this. And I think there's still the gray area of whether these coins constitute securities. They put it through the Howey test to try to figure out, okay, is this a security or is this a utility token? And if it's a security, okay, you have to abide by the rules of the SEC as long as you're, in the US. So I think that's got to be a challenge for the SEC and other regulators. I know for a fact that they've already taken action against certain companies who have, tried to exploit the blockchain in the penny stock area, for example, and other just egregious sort of Ponzi schemes dressed up as an ICO. They just issued a temporary restraining order against a big coin the other day. It was $600 million. It was out of Texas. That's the biggest action they've taken in that market. So then, of course, we'll get to the CFTC action with Tether. Mm-hmm. So as you know, and your listeners know, this moves at lightning pace. It's just so fast. But I do think the regulators understand that, and they know that they have to move a lot faster than they might have had to do in the past.
Yeah. So I think it'd be more interesting for us to talk about Ripple now, because this actually has an air of legitimacy. I mean, Ripple, the company, I've done a couple shows about it, and there's legitimate technologists at this company. So Ripple it's been around for 7 years. Let's talk about Ripple and the currency that they have, XRP. So give a little bit of backstory on Ripple, the company, because you wrote this article about Ripple. I'll put it in the show notes. It's a really good explanation of sort of what Ripple, the company, is, and a discussion of the currency that they have, and sort of the potential or the lack of potential, and certainly the run-up around it. So what does the company itself do?
Yeah, sure. I find Ripple fascinating for many different reasons, and have written about it many times, and I've known the CEOs, over the different, Chris Larson was there, now it's Brad Garlinghouse. And so what they did 7 years ago, they realized that they could make the correspondent banking system more efficient if they introduced a digital currency into the equation. That digital currency was XRP, and I believe it was a predecessor company to Ripple. They created 100 billion of these XRP, and the purpose at the outset was to use XRP as a bridge. So if you had, say, a difficult currency in an emerging market like the Bolivian dollar, and you wanted to change it into Thai baht, that's not a very liquid market. So what their idea was, okay, let's provide this pool of liquidity in the XRP currency so that you can change those Bolivian dollars into XRP, and then somebody over in Thailand who can then change that XRP into the baht. And so that's a pretty elegant solution to these illiquid currency pairs. Whether you need that for a market like the US dollar to the euro is another question. So they got going on that and started to sign banks up around the world and other financial institutions to do exactly that. They got market makers to be willing to sit in the middle and hold that XRP so that the fiat currency could trade in and then out. And they started working with exchanges to list XRP so that people could get access to it in those markets. We found interesting was, it's now 7 years, 5 years, into it. So that's a long time to be establishing a business model. And we wanted to sort of take check in and say, okay, who is at this point actually doing this in the world? They announce a lot of partnerships, but what we found is that they don't have many projects that are in the real world. They have a lot of banks and money service companies in tests internally, but in terms of people in the real world today using XRP for this stated function, we've only found one. It's a Mexican U.S. company that is using XRP to help with remittance payments between the U.S. and Mexico. So that's sort of where we were coming from, and I worked with this story with my great colleague Ed Robinson, who's in London. And, between us, we know a lot of people at banks and people in the payment industry. So we went out to talk to them and gauge whether, so just to take a step back, in the correspondent banking system, this is a $1 trillion business for Wall Street. It makes them a lot of money, and they put a lot of resources into having currency desks all around the world and having bank accounts with local currencies in them all around the world. So when their large corporate customers need to, let's say it's a U.S. company and they need to pay suppliers in Japan, they go to, say, Citigroup and say, okay, please, get our dollars and change them into yen and pay our suppliers in Tokyo. And the banks have been doing that for decades for the largest corporations in the world. So the question then is, does XRP and Ripple have a chance in that market? And it's an ongoing question, but at this point, what we found by talking to executives at some of those largest banks that really have a lock on the correspondent banking market was they don't want to get involved with a digital currency. They have a lot of concerns about it, and maybe they don't understand it. And then on top of that, they would have to convince these commercial clients of theirs that we're gonna do something new here. Don't worry. And it's got a digital currency in the middle of it, and this currency goes up and down. And I think so. What we found through our reporting was, for those reasons and some others, it doesn't seem to us that these large banks are going to just sort of let Ripple take over this market. If to be blunt about it, Wall Street doesn't let people just come in and take over their markets. They're fiercely competitive, and there's a lot of money at stake here. So that's sort of where we came out on one part of the story. And I think what happened through Ripple's evolution is they know this as well. And this is not something that was new to them by any means. So as they've been working with these bank partners like Santander and BBVA and some other folks around the world, I think the banks started to tell them, we like your technology. This is great. You've created a really good, fast and accurate network, but let's just use your ledger to connect me and my bank to a bank in, say, Japan again, so that we can just move dollars to yen over your network. We like that part of your business. We just don't want XRP to be in the middle. And so I think they're having more success with that in terms of the banking sector than maybe with XRP being taken up as the new kind of global reserve currency that would be replacing the dollar. So hopefully, does that make sense? Sort of the overview?
Well, so you're basically, as I understand, they started with this XRP thing, which was, it's kind of like, in some ways, sort of like Tether, which we'll get to, where you have this intermediary currency that can be seamlessly transmuted between different currencies. They tried to do that. They tried to do it as a partnership with banks and work closely with banks, and they moved away from that eventually. Like the currency stayed in circulation. The ideas were still there. Maybe they were still working on it, some of the engineering, but they shifted their focus to this thing, RippleNet, which is what you're talking about, this network of banks and financial institutions. It's like a trust network. It probably has some of the ideas of XRP, because when I report on XRP, what I remember is, what's cool about it is it's sort of, people will criticize the idea of a private blockchain all they want, but what's cool about a private blockchain is that you can have environments where there is a semi low trust, right? Like, if you could trust, you could say that I trust these three other banks and I'm willing to work with them, and you can build automated systems of that trust, and you're not necessarily saying I trust everybody in the network. Whereas with Bitcoin and Ethereum, these are zero trust systems. So I think I thought of XRP, if I remember it correctly, it's like a low trust or a medium trust protocol. But I guess this has all been shifted to RippleNet, all the focus.
I believe you're right. Yeah, they have nodes on their network. It's a little murky to me still about how that network is involved with XRP, and whether if you or I wanted to
Sorry, about RippleNet now?
No, RippleNet is just the bank-to-bank transactions. They call it the payment rails. But I think the XRP transfer, is on a blockchain, like you mentioned, and so there are nodes that make up that blockchain that serve as validators of transactions. It's still an open question to me how that if you or I wanted to be a part of that network, if that's possible, because I believe Ripple has the ability to sort of choose who is on its network for that purpose. And then RippleNet is the, back to the banks and other financial companies saying to them, let's just use this network that you've created and connect. Let's get everybody in the same network. So we're sort of sharing this ledger, and that would make moving fiat currencies faster and cheaper and more secure.
The octopus, a sea creature known for its intelligence and flexibility. Octopus Deploy, a friendly deployment automation tool for deploying applications like .NET apps, Java apps, and more. Ask any developer and they'll tell you that it's never fun pushing code at 5 p.m. on a Friday and then crossing your fingers hoping for the best. We've all been there. We've all done that. And that's where Octopus Deploy comes into the picture. Octopus Deploy is a friendly deployment automation tool, taking over where your build or CI server ends. Use Octopus to promote releases on-prem or to the cloud. Octopus integrates with your existing build pipeline, TFS and VSTS, Bamboo, TeamCity, and Jenkins. It integrates with AWS, Azure, and on-prem environments. You can reliably and repeatedly deploy your .NET and Java apps and more. If you can package it, Octopus can deploy it. It's quick and easy to install, and you can just go to octopus.com to trial Octopus free for 45 days. That's octopus.com, octopus.com. And let's take a step back. So money that flows through the traditional banking system is quite slow. I mean, anybody who's done a bank transfer probably is aware of that. So why is that? In a classical sense, and since you've got so much experience in this sector, explain why it is a slow process to get money through the traditional banking system.
So think of it as each bank has its own ledger, and those ledgers need to be reconciled. And so a lot of times it's maybe manual work where money is moving internationally from one country to another, and the banks involved might not have a presence in that country, so they need to have a partnership with a bank that is in that country. So now you've got an additional ledger involved, and it feels like it's a time-consuming process where these numbers have to be checked, and that can take days or weeks sometimes. It's not unlike when you write a check and it takes several days to clear and actually hit your bank account. That's because your bank needs to check with the bank that it's coming from, that the money is there, and these take time and they're prone to errors. Now, if you think of those individual ledgers, and then you say, wait, let's have one ledger where everybody's a party to it, and those transactions can be verified and move in a much more timely fashion. That's the breakthrough here. So yeah, that's basically what we're talking about. Mm-hmm.
And to return to this XRP discussion, I think part of what spurred you to write your most recent article about XRP, this currency associated with Ripple, the company, is that the currency shot up tremendously. I think it was in early January 2018. It shot up just tremendously, and kind of for no reason. Probably had something to do with the fact that everybody was foaming at the mouth and people were reading about what are the currencies I can or should invest in, and what are the ones where I can get massive leverage for $1,000, and they're looking at the market caps, and they're just saying, okay, which market caps are not at 200 billion yet? I just want to put the money into those ones because they're going to go up to 200 billion for whatever reason. And maybe there was some pumping and dumping behind that, because you wouldn't necessarily have to be Ripple the company to do the pumping and dumping. You could be somebody in a Telegram chat room, and you could say, hey, XRP is like if you took Unix and then you made Mac OS out of it, you made the more presentable, more consumer friendly, the next generation of the primitive technology that is not accessible to the big shiny corporation, and you made it accessible to the banks and the shiny corporations. That's XRP. Like that is the narrative that I've heard from people, is like, this is going to be the path to the shiny, glossy, multi-billion-dollar banks getting into cryptocurrency. But there's no reason for that narrative to actually exist, other than the fact that that was sort of what Ripple was trying to do with XRP in the past, but like not anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think the price must have had an effect here, because when everybody was, getting into this last year, towards the end of the year, and you're watching Bitcoin go from $5,000 to $10,000 to $20,000, and Ether doing, similar big gains, then you see, XRP, it's the third largest crypto by market cap, and oh my gosh, it's 20 cents. So yeah, let me get some of that. And I think it's a lot easier for people to get in on something when it's at 20 cents than at 15,000. Obviously, you can buy tiny shares of Bitcoin, but I think that psychological sort of price point must have had an effect here. And I think the company itself, Ripple, has been promoting XRP really strongly for the last year, and they have announcements about new tests that they're conducting with, like, say, MoneyGram, which is a big money transfer business. Like, I think it's second to Western Union. The thing that I wanted to try to make clear to people was these are pilots, and this is not real world. It's not like it's nothing, but I would be cautious if you're investing, and if you think that this is now going to be, if this is a real world use for XRP, it might be in the future, and that's fine for investing. I just want to try to make it clear to people that this is the state we're in right now. MoneyGram is using XRP in tests for its own transfers internally in their back office operations, and might, in the future, if it works for them internally, they might start using XRP to move money around the world. But that's from the company itself, and that's the state that it's in. So you compare that to the kind of people on Twitter and other social media, and the chat rooms that you're talking about, and it's like XRP has already replaced the US dollar. So I mean, people need, they can invest however they want, but I want to be at least somebody who gets information out there that is well sourced and accurate, and so that people can make decisions based on that, and maybe not on what they hear on Twitter, or something that's misleading.
In order for XRP to be successful, would it have to have a lot less volatility? Like, would it almost have to be a stable coin, or is that a misunderstanding of their technology?
I asked that question, didn't make it into the story, but I asked the CEO, Brad Garlinghouse, about that. I said, why not peg it to the dollar? And I think the answer there is that that's expensive and difficult to do, and you need to hedge, or you need to have like a dollar reserve account. And I think so. One of the things that XRP provides is that it's really cheap, and it's fast. And if you start sort of laying on
in terms of transfer fees, you're talking about.
Yeah, transfer fees. And so the margin for using it is really good, but there is only so much margin. And if you start adding on things to make it less volatile, maybe you're hedging with derivatives or something like that, there's a cost to that. So it's sort of like you got to weigh the cost and the benefit of doing something to make it less volatile. Another thing that I personally don't quite still understand is why XRP is available on the public market when its use is for banks and financial institutions, in these middlemen. I'm all for them having access to it and buying it, but I'm a little concerned that retail investors and other people who might not be as sophisticated are getting into it. And that's a question I think that people need to think about. XRP, as far as I know, has not ever been pitched as a currency to go buy things with. It's always, in this money movement system that's global. So why is it listed on exchanges? I still haven't really gotten a satisfactory answer to that question, but that might be something that I just don't understand yet.
Is it the same thing that Filecoin would say? Like, average user is not going to want to use Filecoin. You're going to want to use some client or something that abstracts away Filecoin and IPFS, but we want to make it accessible to people just basically as an ICO where you have access to investing in that protocol. Did you ask Brad Garlinghouse, the CEO, about that? About, why is this available to public people?
I did. And he said that they aren't responsible for that they don't control all of the XRP in circulation.
Oh.
So
if somebody bought it, if a bank bought it during the pre-sale or whatever, however they ICO'd or whatever, the bank could then release it to a exchange.
Yes, a secondary market started to develop, and I think what happened over the years was, I think Ripple did exactly that. They sold XRP, or they gave XRP to some of their partners so that they had it, of course, because they needed it for their system to work. And that doesn't mean that financial institution or whatever had to hold that XRP. I think they started, they could sell it in the secondary market. And then eventually when crypto exchanges became more, prevalent and they started getting listed there. Because remember, 7 years ago, I'm not sure there were many crypto exchanges out there. That's a rather, that's the last few years or so. I mean, there always have been, but there's a lot more of them now, I guess is my point. And so at this point, Ripple does control the vast majority of XRP. I believe they control 61 billion, and 55 billion of those are locked up in escrow, which they did to try to soothe fears that there would be some huge XRP dump, So they've locked that up and can only release a certain amount per month into the public markets. So that's just my concern is that it's sort of like, everyday folks, it's hard to open up a derivatives account. That's supposed to be sort of like for sophisticated investors with a certain amount of money in their brokerage account. And I feel like with cryptocurrencies, we should be thinking the same way when, something that's intended for the financial system and internally, maybe that's not the best thing to have out for people to be able to buy and sell. That doesn't make me popular. I just think that we have rules in all these other financial markets about, who can participate in some of the more sophisticated parts of the derivatives or the bond market, for example. So I don't feel like this is that different.
So they're continuing to work on XRP. They're continuing to do these experiments. Do you have a sense for where that project is going? And I mean, Ripple, the companies, they're working on RippleNet, they're working on XRP. Can you take me inside the Ripple company and explain what their product roadmap looks like? Or, give me a best sense from your talking to the CEO as you can?
Yeah, I wouldn't presume to speak for them, but I think where I don't think they disagree with. They seem to be having success with money transfer businesses more than banks. So MoneyGram and a few others who, maybe in remittances. That's a huge market where people are sending small amounts of money to Africa or India or Mexico, back to their families, that sort of thing. And I think the relative cheapness of XRP and the speed make that a good fit. So I wouldn't be surprised if in a few years, XRP did have a toehold there, and that was something that was gaining in popularity. Whether it's going to be the large banks, that's at this point still doesn't look that way. They do have a deal on the RippleNet part of their business that we've been speaking about with a bank in Sweden, and they're using it to move Swedish kroner into dollars between the U.S. and Sweden. And I think they might have done $100 billion of transfers last year in that. So, that's happening. Again, that doesn't use XRP, but that's Ripple technology being used and sort of integrated into the financial world. So I think they're going to try to build that business and try to get partners. And they have great funding in the sense that XRP is valuable. I haven't checked the price lately, but when we wrote our story, that XRP that they held totaled something like $86 billion. So that's a nice war chest to have for a company. I'm not saying you could liquidate that and get $86 billion, but I think XRP as a currency is a very interesting funding mechanism for Ripple, the company.
Yeah. Even if it's just a belief that Ripple, the company, has been working for 7 years to figure out the banking system and to figure out ideas for how cryptocurrency-like systems could accelerate the banking system. Even if it's just a bet on the team and the knowledge they've accumulated and the mistakes they've made, that's not necessarily an irrational valuation.
No, I agree. And when you talk about investing, you're always looking towards the future. You're always saying, all right, I need to get in now for the future gains, or maybe those gains are being priced in by people getting into the market now. Stocks sell off or get bought up based on what the company says is going to happen, in next quarter and the quarter after. So along those lines, yeah, it's definitely rational. I think they just have a lot of work to do, and the competition is fierce here. As I've been saying, the banks make a lot of money and invested, decades worth of infrastructure and cost to have operations all around the world so that they can service their clients who need to move money. One thing we should touch on briefly is the current system is SWIFT.
Yes.
It goes back to the 70s. Nobody likes it. It's really hard to find somebody who says it's great, but it is the current system, and it's a messaging system that banks used when they need to send, they message, the messages go around and everything needs to be verified, and then the banks actually send the money. That's kind of the steps in the process. So I think Ripple has definitely gotten Swift's attention, and they are now working on vastly speeding up their own network and making it much more resemble the way that RippleNet works. And
wow.
So they have, the thing is there is something like 11,000 financial institutions already in the Swift network and using it every day to send, I think we said it's $76 billion a day moves in this market around the world. So that's the incumbent, and they have quite a home field advantage. If Swift can listen to the banks and upgrade and make itself more like what Ripple is offering, I think, that's going to be another tough hurdle in Ripple's hopes of, kind of modernizing and becoming a big player in that market.
Mm-hmm. Okay, just to close off on Ripple, the bottom line from your article: Ripple wants to change how banks move money around the world, but that may or may not have anything to do with XRP. And maybe the market is confused about that, maybe not. Anything else we didn't touch on about Ripple?
No, I think we covered it. It's just, the takeaway is, hopefully there's enough information out there to be informed about how things are going. And it's important that an independent press, does stories like this so that you can get a different perspective than from the company or from people who own it or own XRP already and want to see it go up by other people getting in.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Speaking of the importance of the press, I think writing about Tether is pretty important. Tether is this purported stablecoin, and this is something that you wrote a piece about yesterday. Explain what Tether is. What is problematic about Tether?
Yeah, like you said, so a stable coin is a digital currency that, unlike Bitcoin or XRP or Ether, it would not fluctuate. It would not have any volatility. And the way you achieve that in regards to Tether is they say that every Tether that is created is backed by a US dollar that they've received and that they hold in a bank account. So if the demand for Tether is, say, 20 million, that means that they've received $20 million and put it in reserve in their account, and then they create 20 million new Tether for the company or the person who wanted that amount. That's, in theory, it's great. I think it's in theory works. It seems like, that would keep it from fluctuating, because why wouldn't it just move in lockstep with how the dollar moves? The concern is that Tether, the company, has not convinced the broader market that it actually has that money in reserve. So at this point, I believe $2.3 billion worth of Tether have been created and are out in the market. That means they should have $2.3 billion sitting in the bank account. They haven't been able to prove that sufficiently to people. When I've written about them, they say, yes, it's there, but they were going through an audit process, but they just severed that agreement with the auditor. And I think that kind of raised a red flag with people. And it also, the backdrop here is Tether is very closely related to one of the biggest exchanges in the world, Bitfinex. They have the same CEO and they share executives. And Bitfinex lost its access to U.S. customers last year when Wells Fargo ended its correspondent banking relationship with them. And they lost some banks that they also had, I believe, in Taiwan. Might be Hong Kong, I can't remember. And so for a company like Tether and Bitfinex to not have banking relationships is a concern, because how are people moving money in and out there if there's no bank? And since last year, they have refused to tell us, that they are using new banks. And I think all of that was led to some stories late last year, first in the New York Times, and then I wrote a story in early December about it, just sort of raising these questions and trying to get the companies to talk to us and tell us what was going on. So it turns out, it was a day after my story ran in December, the CFTC sent subpoenas to Bitfinex and to Tether with the intent of trying to get to the bottom of this. And that's the story I reported on yesterday. It appears that, that's really the only way that we're going to be able to get to the bottom of this.
I don't know if you remember this story, but there was a company called Full Tilt Poker, actually. Well, it still exists. But back when I played poker, I just remember this. Full Tilt Poker, people would put their money in, and you would expect, okay, I transfer $30 to Full Tilt Poker. I've got $30 in my Full Tilt Poker bank account, or my Full Tilt Poker account, and I can go and play at tables and gamble with people for that $30. What happened was Full Tilt Poker decided, well, we've got $800 million in player account balances, and we've had at least $500 million in bank account balances for the last 10 years. We can take out $300 million and play with it. Like their employees, right? Their employees took out the $300 million and just distributed it amongst themselves and played with it themselves and took it off the table, essentially, because they figured we're always going to have, this is the idea of margin, right? Basically, they can assume that because people have put so much money into the casino, they're always going to have some amount of money that they can just take out and do whatever they want with. And to some extent, that's true. Banks do that to a certain extent. The concern is that Tether positioned themselves as saying, we have $1 in our bank account for every one Tether that has been issued. But if people believe that enough, if people build up enough trust in that, then Tether might start to say, well, let's take a little bit of this off the table. Maybe let's buy some Bitcoin with it. Let's, Bitcoin's as good as dollars. Let's just have that in reserve. And then that starts to be a complicated house of cards. And I think that's what people, such as yourself, have probably realized for a while. Like, okay, if you can really do this, Tether, let's see your technology, or let's see your account balances. Like, what do you have to hide? And from Tether's actions, it certainly seems like they have a lot to hide.
Yes, I think you said it very well. I don't know this for a fact, but I would imagine that the beginnings of the company, they were receiving money. And then my suspicion is that at some point the market believed them and would value a Tether at $1. So I think it's possible that they said, well, let's print some Tether and go out and get dollars for it, or more like Bitcoin. And the concern is that Tether is printing Tethers with no dollars backing them, and going to exchanges like Bitfinex and using that value to buy Bitcoin. And so while there's been a great retail demand and institutional demand for Bitcoin over the last, several years, there could also be this maybe phantom demand that you can tie back to Tether. When you look at the numbers, that they're quite staggering. When I wrote about this in December, they claim to have 820 some million in a bank account. That number is now 2.3 billion. So from the time they got the subpoenas on December 6th to, today or yesterday, they have put out into the market 1.3 billion, I think it's 1.3 billion new Tether. That should be a major concern for people when, they have not been willing to just publicly verify or bring in an accountant or an auditing firm to just say, yeah, this is real. Because another way to think about it, think of what you could do with $2.3 billion in a bank account. That's money, and you can turn that money into more money. Like you were saying about with margin, they would want to be careful about, how much they always had in reserve. But, this is a staple of finances. You have a certain amount that you always need, but you can loan out the rest, or you can go into the repo market with the rest. And sort of, there are many, many different companies and industries who need cash on an overnight basis. And you would think, if they were smart, they could sort of work that into their business plan. So there's just so many red flags here. It's just, I think it's going to be fascinating to see how it all unfolds.
Your company needs to build a new app, but you don't have the spare engineering resources. There are some technical people in your company who have time to build apps, but they're not engineers. They don't know JavaScript or iOS or Android, and that's where OutSystems comes in. OutSystems is a platform for building low-code apps. As an enterprise grows, it needs more and more apps to support different types of customers and internal employee use cases. Do you need to build an app for inventory management? Does your bank need a simple mobile app for mobile banking transactions? Do you need an app for visualizing your customer data? OutSystems has everything that you need to build, release, and update your apps without needing an expert engineer. And if you are an engineer, you will be massively productive with OutSystems. Find out how to get started with low-code apps today at outsystems.com/SEDaily. There are videos showing how to use the OutSystems development platform and testimonials from enterprises like FICO, Mercedes-Benz, and Safeway. And I love to see new people exposed to software engineering. That's exactly what OutSystems does. OutSystems enables you to quickly build web and mobile applications, whether you are an engineer or not. Check out how to build low-code apps by going to outsystems.com/SEDaily. Thank you to OutSystems for being a new sponsor of Software Engineering Daily, and you're building something that's really cool and very much needed in the world. So thank you, OutSystems. I think what I read was that the way that people are using Tether is basically similar to what we were talking about with Ripple, but for cryptocurrencies. So the idea is it is hard to transfer Bitcoin into Gollum currency or whatever. And so people, instead of going from Bitcoin to dollars to Gollum currency, you would go from Bitcoin to Tether to Gollum currency. And for some reason, that is more liquid, it's faster, and it's so much faster that this is perhaps contributing to the fast-moving markets, and then so the markets would just really slow down because of a loss of Tether. Do we have any idea how much liquidity, or what percentage of the cryptocurrency market liquidity makes its way through Tether on a given day?
I don't know of that. That would be great to know. I think that the difficulty there is that it's offered on a lot of different exchanges around the world, and you'd somehow have to aggregate all of that and understand the volume. So again, in theory, this is a thing that I think is good for the market. It's just, it seems not that hard to come out and say, yes, here are the numbers, here are the books. We want you to have confidence in us. When I was dealing with Tether on the last story I did in December, they just refused. They wanted me to sign a non-disclosure agreement, and then they said they would tell me who their banks were, and so of course we didn't do that. But I don't understand that they said that they have privacy agreements and that they don't want to expose these banks to public scrutiny. But when you're a big part of a market and people have confidence in you, you need to earn that trust, in my opinion. And I feel like it wouldn't take a lot for Tether to sort of show the world that it is, in fact, on the up and up.
There's this Twitter account. I think you've seen it. I think I've seen you retweet it or something. Bitfinex, or what is it?
Yeah.
It's like this anonymous Twitter account, and it just tweets all of this stuff that's basically like, this is why Tether is bad or very skeptical, or this is why Bitfinex is skeptical. Do you have any idea who that person is? Or because it kind of reminds me of Zero Hedge. Is Zero Hedge this like semi
Tyler Durden, right?
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's sort of like a Zero Hedge of cryptocurrency. They just kind of talk about the conspiracy theories and maybe the bearish cases on different aspects of cryptocurrency.
Yes, I am very familiar with Bitfinex. I follow him or her or them, but I don't know the identity. I've asked, but that person is concerned about his safety and other things, and that's a sort of a sad commentary right now about some of the elements of this new market. What I found, so I don't know who this person is, but I have found the information that I'm just going to say he, for the ease of it, that he puts out has been really very accurate. A lot of the documents that he posts are real, and I've been able to verify them independently. So I wish I could get to the bottom of him and just what is your motivation here? Because it's amazing how much effort he puts into it. I think he has done the market a service by keeping attention on this. And in my position as a reporter, I'm forced to pay attention to him because it keeps coming, and I can't look away. So for that, I think we owe him some thanks. And I think, he helped lead to the New York Times story and a lot of other stories in other publications. And it'll be very interesting to see if all of his work is vindicated someday.
What do you think about his perspective on Litecoin, this was a currency that was started by Charlie Lee, who was one of the early employees at Coinbase, but Litecoin was started before he joined Coinbase, I believe, and it was a currency that he started, and then recently, in the huge cryptocurrency run-up, Litecoin turned into multi-billion-dollar currency, just like any other crap coin. But this is a little bit more legitimate coin. I mean, it's a coin you can actually buy it on Coinbase. But he sold all of his holdings, and he got a lot of criticism from the community. And I thought it was totally fine. I was like, okay, whatever. I mean, people still sell their startups all the time. They sell all their equity in a startup. That doesn't mean that they've lost faith in the startup. But he got so much criticism. I guess maybe the optics were bad, but Bitfinex really tore into him and really criticized him. So I actually made suggestions that perhaps there was some insider trading involved with perhaps Coinbase, which I thought was like pretty brazen to say.
Yeah, what's fascinating about that is any sort of allegations of insider trading right now have to be policed by those exchanges and those participants, because let's not forget, this isn't regulated yet by the SEC, and they don't. I think there's this gray area where some coins are going to be deemed securities and others are not. But at this point, I don't know that insider trading, yeah, it's bad, but is it illegal? I don't know. I don't think so. You raise a big point. If somebody at Coinbase knows that they're going to be listing a new coin and they go out ahead of that and buy a whole bunch of it, and then when that news comes out, the coin goes way up. Yeah, and I think there is an internal investigation at Coinbase about that right now, whether employees were engaged in that. So I'm not going to opine on Charlie Lee. I'll let those folks speak for themselves, and Bitfinex can certainly speak for himself. I agree with your point that you should be like, startups do get sold all the time. Maybe what he could have done was say, I'm going to sell my stake and I'm going to do it every week for the next 6 weeks. If maybe a little more transparency would have not unleashed the anger that he received. I don't know, because I don't remember, but did he just sort of tell everybody, okay, I just sold?
I think that was it. I think it was literally a tweet that was like, I just sold all of my holdings. I'm just going to kind of focus on the technology now. And
yeah, like, here's the bag. You guys hold it.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think it's fascinating to see these folks sort of like that are, by all intents and purposes, they're brilliant, and they're smart, and they work really hard, and they're on the cutting edge here. And then they sort of run into this financial world where, there's a certain type of behavior expected of folks. And that's a really interesting dynamic to me about how the crypto world and the Wall Street world are going to get along, and how they're going to teach each other about the different aspects of what they all know.
Tell me more about that. Like, what do you think is going to happen, or what's, given the cross section of your banking background and your current aggressive reporting on the cryptocurrency world, do you have any interesting predictions about where this is going?
A good example is the ICO kind of craze, and I think you've got a whole group of folks who realized that this was a great funding mechanism and that there was a lot of money in digital currencies. So let's tap into that money. But they didn't have an appreciation a lot of times for the fact that it seems like you're raising capital from a broad marketplace. And the SEC exists to police that. And so thinking that you can just come in and say to your investors before the ICO, no, this isn't a security. This is just our utility token. And we hope to raise $200 million for this project that we will then build. That, I think, they need better lawyers. They need people to advise them on the fact that looks almost exactly like an IPO. And, there are strict rules about IPOs and about disclosure and about making sure investors are informed and about who can sell, into the IPO. And all of those things are real and serious, and people go to jail for violating those rules. So, that's a pretty bright example to me of these two worlds kind of mashing together. On the flip side, I think Wall Street's sort of the way that it turned its nose up onto Bitcoin for so many years and then finally had this big reversal when it started going through the roof is kind of ridiculous. Like, it was evil incarnate, and then banks couldn't, get a trading desk together fast enough. So, there are biases on each side here. And the really interesting folks that I find are the ones who have a good foot planted in each world. Those are the people that I find really helpful to sort of guide me through how this market is evolving right before our eyes.
Well, yeah. Well, maybe I'll have to get some pointers to people I should be talking to as well. Okay. Well, I know we've gone over basically, but what's next for Tether? Like, what is the next step in the investigation?
That is a great question, and that's what I'm going to be trying to find out. It's very difficult to get information on ongoing investigations. So that's a challenge for me and for other reporters that cover this beat. So the subpoena process, basically what they do is they issue subpoenas to these companies and say, we want to know what you're doing. We need to talk to you. And a lot of times the regulators won't know what they're doing, and they'll broadly subpoena a firm or a company and come in and start talking to people. And then based on that information, then they start building a roadmap, and they might issue more subpoenas to talk to somebody that they've just learned about. So it's a step-by-step process. Another question. So obviously they would want to get to the bank accounts, right? If you were Tether, you would want to have, all of your bank balance sheets ready for them and open on the table when they walk in, and try to clear this up. That's the thing we've been kind of speaking about, is this doesn't seem that difficult to resolve. If the money's there, just prove it, So it might be a short investigation, and everything might be okay. I'm not saying it's not. It's just that the company is acting in ways that make you have these concerns. So the subpoena process will continue like that. I think the CFTC is getting a lot more savvy about these investigations. I think most of the U.S. regulatory agencies are getting more sophisticated and understanding that actually a blockchain is a great regulatory tool, because it has a trail of every transaction that occurs. When you want to launder money in cash, you can give somebody a suitcase and they put it in the trunk of their car and it's gone. On a blockchain, you're going to have a record of that. So I think they're understanding that aspect to it, and realizing that it's, in some ways, it can make their job easier. Just a broad one more thing on subpoenas. The CFTC is they issue civil subpoenas and bring civil cases. They do have the option of going to the Justice Department and the FBI and saying, we think, there's enough here for you guys to start a criminal proceeding. So that's a possibility. And that's happened in other areas of market manipulation and cases that I've covered. So I wouldn't tell anybody to expect this to, it's not a fast process. They're thorough and it takes time, but that's sort of how it's going to play out. Whether Tether or Bitfinex come out and publicly say anything, I don't know. It's pretty rare for companies that are being investigated. They don't really want to make public comments about that. And certainly with Tether and Bitfinex, they barely make public comments to begin with. So I think this is going to be a story that plays out in the press for the foreseeable future.
Not to open a can of worms, but I thought of one more thing I wanted to ask you about, which is the Chinese ICO. So, for example, Tron. You must have seen Tron, right?
Oh, man. So when you were talking about this earlier, I was thinking of that exactly, because one day I just looked at the coin market cap and just at the top 10, I'm like, I didn't recognize like 3 or 4, and there's this one is Tron. I'm like, what the hell is this? It's got an enormous market cap. I don't think it even really exists, But
so Tron, when I was in Austin, and the night, after my friend showed me those 82x gains on his Rye blocks, where he had just put in some money and got 82x gains, I was like, what the heck is going on here? Do I need to get into this? And so I was like, okay, I'm going to look at these. I'm just going to take a look. I haven't actually read any of these white papers for these crap coins. Maybe one of these is actually good. So I read a white paper for the Tron one, because it was the 6th highest cryptocurrency. Reddit was talking about it. So I said, what the hell? Yeah. I'll try to vet this thing myself. Maybe I'm a crypto expert. Maybe I can start a crypto hedge fund. So I read the white paper, and it starts out, it's really romantic and compelling. It's written by someone from China. They're talking about decentralization. They want to get out from under the Great Firewall. They want to decentralize social networks and cloud providers. And, I'm getting into it. It's like 4 a.m. I'm on 3 hours of sleep. I've got the image of my friend's 82x gains on Rye blocks just, seared into my imagination. And I'm getting swept up into this cyberpunk narrative of Tron. By the way, the Tron white paper, you can find it at tron.network. That's their website. I'm looking at the team. Wow. The engineering is the engineering team looks okay. Like there's somebody who was at Tencent. And then I read a little bit further, and I'm getting into the technical weeds. And I'm like, wait a second. This is not decentralized at all. It's not a decentralized blockchain. They have what they call centralized consensus. It's just like a set of servers on like running Kafka. It's like it's just a centralized database, basically. Like it might as well, it's just like centralized database. They plan to eventually move to decentralization. And then also they mention off the cuff, oh, we want to build a VM system that's better than Docker. And Docker is this like very, open source VM like system. So it's all just vaporware. And then I read that the Tron white paper was just plagiarized from the IPFS white paper. And at that point, you look at it's the sixth highest market cap cryptocurrency. It's like you don't know whether to laugh or to cry.
Yeah, I am totally with you. And that's sort of informing some of my coverage and trying to just get at the bottom of some of this stuff, because you're obviously very sophisticated and know this. And they had you going for a while. And, that's... Scammers are always good at that. That's why they scam people. And so it's up to people in this community and the press that covers it to, hold these folks to account and try to get some just basic facts established. So, yeah, I'm glad you didn't get in.
I certainly did not. Okay. And so do you have any idea, like, can we regulate the Chinese ICOs or?
God, that's another fascinating part of this whole story is how do you regulate a blockchain that's global, that's, pretty much, if it's done right, it's immutable and sort of beyond the control of governments and corporations. It comes down to whether you can restrict internet access or not. You know how difficult that is, if not impossible. So that being said, yeah, of course it can be regulated, and I do get the sense that this is really testing regulators' relationships with their foreign counterparties, like the Japanese regulators and the CFTC and the Chinese regulators and the SEC. They all need to be coordinating to an extent that I'm not sure they've ever done before, because this market is global, and we've seen it move quickly when China has, put out restrictions on Bitcoin exchanges, for example. That really, it was just a blip in the radar, and things will just move to a friendlier country. So that's going to be a challenge for regulators to all get on the same page, because they like their home turf. They want to feel like they are capable of regulating their home markets, and so some American outsider coming in might be seen as like, oh, you're belittling us. We don't know. You think we don't know what we're doing. There's no time for that in this sort of world where, this Tron coin can just emerge and all of a sudden be worth billions of dollars on a plagiarized white paper. I mean, who's left holding the bag there, And that's so, unfortunately, I think the vast majority of the ICO stuff is going to fall into that bucket, and people are going to lose a lot of money, and the only ones I see coming out on top of this are the lawyers who are just going to have years and years of cases.
All right, Matt. Well, thanks for giving me so much time. It's been awesome talking to you. I'm sure this will be a good episode. The DAO hack was really popular, and yeah, I'm looking forward to to more of your reporting. I'm sure we'll have more to talk about in the future.
Yeah. I hope so too, Jeff. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
If you are building a product for software engineers, or you are hiring software engineers, Software Engineering Daily is accepting sponsorships for 2018. Send me an email, jeff@softwareengineeringdaily.com, if you're interested. With 23,000 people listening Monday through Friday, and the content being fairly selective for a technical listener, Software Engineering Daily is a great way to reach top engineers. And I know that the listeners of Software Engineering Daily are great engineers because I talk to them all the time. I hear from CTOs, CEOs, directors of engineering who listen to the show regularly. I also hear about many newer, hungry software engineers who are looking to level up quickly and prove themselves. And to find out more about sponsoring the show, you can send me an email or tell your marketing director to send me an email, jeff@softwareengineeringdaily.com. And if you're a listener to the show, thank you so much for supporting it through your audienceship. That is quite enough, but if you're interested in taking your support of the show to the next level, then look at sponsoring the show through your company. So send me an email at jeff@softwareengineeringdaily.com. Thank you.
Wow.